In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplin Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplin's report today comes from the book of Ruth, and you may remember we were reading a little bit about Ruth the last time we met on the Chaplin's report and talking about how Ruth's husband was an Israelite and his mother, of course, was an Israelite as well, and he had died, and Ruth, despite being a Moabitess, despite being somebody from a far-off country, she says, no, I'm going to remain loyal to my mother-in-law, I'm going to take care of her, and then we are going to go forward and we are going to go and live in Israel since my husband has died and her other son, unfortunately, had died as well. And so they leave Moab and they go back to Israel. And Ruth says this, and this is sort of a speech that Naomi gives when they've returned to Israel. They've come back to Bethlehem. And this one comes from Ruth chapter 1, and we'll look at verse 19. It's actually right where we left off last time, verses 19 through 21. So they both went until they came to Bethlehem, and when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, Is this Naomi? And she said to them, Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. What do you call me, Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? It's pretty clear when you're reading this verse that there is a certain sense of neglect, there's a certain sense of abandonment that Naomi feels even towards God. So much so that she has lost her identity to a degree. She says, I don't even want to be referred to as Naomi because when I go back home, I don't want people to be like, oh, look, Naomi had this great life and she went to live off in Moab and now she's coming back and both of her sons are gone and the only person left in the world is Ruth. So Naomi's a little bitter about this. She doesn't necessarily have the best attitude. But Naomi does feel defeated and sort of neglected by God. And to a degree, I'm not saying that this makes it right, but it's understandable. It is understandable that she is a little bit upset because she's just lost both of her sons. And you have to remember that back in the day, widows and people without either a son or a husband or something to take care of them, it was very, very difficult for a woman to make it because she couldn't do as much physical labor as a man. And back then the economy was primarily predicated upon how much physical labor you could do. And so because of that, Naomi is in a tough spot right now. And we'll see here in just a second that when she returns to Israel, her plan, at least for the immediate future, is to glean. Gleaning is a process by which the Israelites would leave a portion of their fields for the less fortunate. So basically she's saying, I left, I had this great life, I was going with my sons who had just met these women and had married them, and now I'm coming back and both of my sons are gone, my husband's gone, and now I have to beg for my food. So Naomi has lost just about everything except Ruth. And so it's understandable that she feels a little defeated. We all get like this. Even those of us that are very strong in the faith, bad things happen to us, and sometimes we just feel like, almost like God has neglected us. Like God's not really taking care of us. We see this all the time in the prophets. If you'll look back at some of the language that she uses here, it is really powerful. If you'll look at that, the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. I mean, she is upset at God. She really is. And that's a bad place to be, but even some of God's most faithful felt like this from time to time. You can look at, for example, Elijah, who was so distraught that he asked God to take his life. And so, even after we do things, even when we feel like we're doing the right thing and trying to obey God, sometimes life kicks you in the teeth. And you do feel this sense of abandonment. But imagine how poor she would feel without Ruth. Because remember, Ruth is pretty much the only thing left in her life now. Her daughter-in-law. And so God has provided her with the only thing that she's going to need. I mean, yeah, pretty much all she's got left in this world is Ruth. And what we'll see later on in this book is that that was enough. And that's the thing. Sometimes God allows things to be taken away from us, allows blessings to no longer be a part of our lives, but at no point does he ever leave us ill-equipped to do his will. He doesn't give us everything that we want, but he always gives us enough. He always gives us enough. And that is something that we have to keep in mind. We may not even have enough to physically sustain ourselves, but we always have enough to spiritually sustain ourselves and to do what is right. That is something that is consistent throughout all of God's word. Because God has an amazing talent for bringing good out of even the worst situations. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine not too long ago about this exact subject, about how sometimes life just kicks you down and horrible things happen. And one of the things that I talked to him about is when I was going through cancer, I felt like this for a little while. And I thought, as horrible as it is that I didn't have insurance, I didn't have any way to provide for myself, I didn't have a way to take care of myself from a medical perspective, God gave me everything I needed. He gave me a great nurse. He gave me a great doctor. He gave me people at Baptist that cared about me enough to let me know about programs. He gave me a surgeon that was willing to take half cost, basically do it not at a loss, but certainly to where he wasn't making any money off of the surgery because he knew my financial situation, Dr. Buddha down in Montgomery. He was willing to do that, basically not making any money off of it, just doing it at cost because he knew my financial situation. And so he had that and all these people from churches. Money just started pouring in from all across the country. There was so much that was given to me. God didn't give me everything I wanted, but he gave me enough, and that's the point. And that's the point that Naomi is going to see here very soon in this narrative. That just having her daughter-in-law with her, that was enough to provide for her. And you look at different stories throughout the Bible. You look at Joseph, who was sold into slavery and then rose to the top and then got kicked back down again and went into prison for a crime he didn't commit and then raised back up and became the number 2 man in the most powerful country on earth. You look at Moses. I mean, Moses should have died as a baby. And yet, despite that horrible situation where there was a genocide of children, Moses was able to emerge from that. Moses, the man who God used to bring the children of Israel out of slavery. And Moses had several downs in his life as well. I mean, we could go on and on about this. You can look at Paul, who had so many setbacks in his ministry and kept pushing forward and kept doing the right thing, and eventually God did bless him for that. Or, and this is the main one, we remember Jesus. The greatest good that has ever come in the universe was God giving his only son. And how did he do it? Through a terrible situation. The sacrifice and the brutal murder of the only perfect man. And so, yes, sometimes life gives you stuff you don't want to deal with. But God has just an amazing talent for bringing wonderful, amazing, beautiful things to come out of even the worst situations. And if he did it through his son, if he did it through the death of the only innocent man that has ever lived, he can certainly bring good out of the terrible things that come to us in our life. And I want you to remember that Naomi is about to be blessed through Ruth. Naomi is going to be somebody who is remembered for all of time. We're thousands of years after her life, and we're still talking about her today. That's how important Naomi is. And Ruth is about to be a part of the lineage of King David. And long term, if we're looking a little further into the future, that means by extension, she is also a part of the lineage of Jesus Christ, the greatest blessing that has ever come to mankind. So just remember that when you're going through terrible situations in your own life, that sometimes God brings the best parts of us, the best things to us, the best blessings that we could ever imagine, things that we can't even imagine in our lifetime, through the worst situations and the worst scenarios that come to us in our life. And when you remember that, it does give you a feeling of invincibility. That no matter how bad things get, as long as God is there and he is willing to bless us, then no matter what comes our way, he will bring something wonderful out of it. Stay the course, friends.